This is an SP404 Mark II, and similar to the others in the SP range going back historically, there are two main ways of putting beats together. The first one is to make use of the built-in pattern sequencer, which has its quirks, but it gets the job done. Another way is to use resampling, and if you're not aware of what resampling is, then it literally is what it says. It's taking a sample and sampling it again. But what you can do with the SPs is you can start to layer these samples together, and because of this you can make full beats. So for example, if you had a loop from a record that you'd sampled, you could then resample it with a kick over the top. You could then resample that sample and put the snare in, hi-hats, etc, etc, and before you know it you've got a full beat. So they're the two main ways of making beats on the SP. Today I'm going to focus on resampling, and I want to share some really good tips with you guys to make the workflow easier and faster. So if you're one of those people that maybe uses pattern sequencer and you want to give resampling a try, then these tips will definitely help. They may also help those of you that have been doing it for a long time. Hopefully I can share some knowledge with you guys as well. So as usual, let's get the overhead camera set up and let's get into the tips for this one. Okay guys, so here we are at the device, and I'll do my best to talk you through these. These are actually quite difficult to explain verbally, so I'll do my absolute best, but hopefully these tips will help you to make beats faster and easier. So the first thing that I'm going to suggest to you is make sure you record a drum loop first and then lay your samples over the top. Now this makes resampling beats a lot easier. If you try and record the chops first, it's really difficult to keep them in time with the older SP devices. Now this does actually have a metronome for resampling, which is super handy, but I still prefer to resample the drums first. So I'll quickly show you this. I'll resample a drum loop. Now we can resample again, and we'll do the chops over the top. So if we try and do that the other way around, I'll do a resample and do this to 10. Okay, so we've got that loop, and we're going to resample and do drums over the top. Not the best example, but that was a lot harder to try and keep in time, and it sounds a lot more wonky. Now, some of you will go for that vibe. That's the kind of vibe that you want. For me personally, I much prefer doing the drums first, and I think it just makes things a lot easier in general. Now, these samples were in time with the tempo that I wanted to play anyway, but you start getting into real difficulties when the tempo of your samples are not the same as the beat that you're trying to make. That's where you'll come into a lot more hardship when you're doing that. So as a rule, I would say, yeah, drums first is definitely an easier option. So give that a try, and hopefully that makes your resampling a little bit easier. My next tip, and this applies mainly to older SPs because you get issues with polyphony when you're resampling. So there's limits to how many buttons you can press while you're resampling on older devices. On this particular device that I'm using here, there's not a problem anymore. It's got 32 polyphony, which is just really useful. So I don't need to do this particularly, but for older devices, make sure all your drums are in mono. Or if you use the last method, like I'm just saying, of doing a drum loop first, record that drum loop in mono as well. And the way you will do that is, I can't show you right now because obviously I'd have to get out my other device, is you just press resample and you make sure that the stereo button isn't lit, and then that will resample in mono. So on a Mark II, you can do this. You go to the pad and go to pitch and speed, you hold shift and you can see it says pan here, and you can change it to mono left or mono right. But like I mentioned, there's no real need on this device because the polyphony is so high. To be honest, I like my drums to be mono anyway, so I'm not sure if these are actually stereo or mono at the moment, but I would always prefer to have my drums mono anyway. But yeah, as a tip for saving yourself some hardship along the way, making your drums mono is definitely a good starting point, and it will give you a bit more scope with the polyphony to mess around with more samples. Okay, my next tip, and this is a really useful one, is to leave the trimming of the loop until you're absolutely happy with the result of it. So I'll do this as an example. Say I go to resample something. And I've tried to end the recording there exactly when I want the loop to end. Okay, and amazingly, I got that absolutely perfect, which is fine for now. But say if I wanted to add an effect to that, Let's say I want to add some 404 vinyl sim. And when I go to resample that, you can see there it's not quite right now. It's messed up a bit and you'd have to go back again and redo it. What I would suggest is don't bother trying to make a perfect loop on the first time round. Just leave a little bit at the end. And when I say leave a bit at the end, start playing the loop over again. So I'll give you an example here. And I'll make this loop shorter so it's quicker. Okay, so I played slightly over the loop that I wanted. And now if I wanted to add an effect, resample that. And now, say that was the finished result and I was happy with it, I can go into start end. Obviously, if you're on the older devices, you'll have to do this by ear. And I can just go ahead and trim where I want it to be. And there we go, it's absolutely perfect. So I think that's a great tip. Record more than you need, then you've got that contingency that you can go back when you're trimming that loop and you've got all this extra space. You can get it really perfect and it's not going to be really difficult. You're not going to be dealing with like really small pieces of audio. You're going to be chopping nice and neatly, and overall it's going to get you better results. It's really hard to explain that one, but honestly, when you start doing it in practice, you'll see exactly what I mean. It's just way easier to do the trimming right at the end of the process rather than at the start and then trying to resample that. Okay, my final tip is to leave banks spare. So this will be a great place to store your resampled loops and then you don't run out of space on your bank. So for example, if I go to resample this, and let's just say hypothetically that was ready and I was happy with it. Instead of keeping it here and then having less and less room to work with, all you have to do is go Shift Exchange, and I'm going to put that in F. And then I'm going to go back to A, and now I've got the same amount of pads free again. Say I want to do a variation. Okay. And that one's ready, so I'm going to exchange that one over to F as well. And I can go ahead and do another loop, and so on and so on and so on. So when you've finished, it's really good practice, I think, to exchange those finished ones into a new bank, and then you've got loads of space again to work with to make a new beat or make a new variation. You will quickly run out of room if you keep all your variations and loops in the same bank. So you might have to think about how you're building projects when you're using Resample. You're probably not going to be able to do one per bank because you do really quickly run out of room. From the looks of my experiments here, 2 banks per beat would be a really good way of working, and obviously that means you get a beat per button, which is quite nice as well, so that's quite neat and organised. And then I've got my variations here. So they're my tips, guys. I hope they help you out. Some of those were a little tricky to explain, so I hope they came across right. I hope they help you and make your resampling workflow a little bit easier and a little bit faster. Resampling has got a lot of quirks to it. You do have to think outside of the box a lot. With the Mark II, they really have made a massive improvement with allowing that 32 polyphony, because you can just resample so much at the same time now, and it just makes it a lot less painful. So if you're someone that usually uses the pattern mode, it might be fun to experiment with resampling, as it might give you some more creative ideas. And yeah, for those of you that already resample, I hope there was some tips in here that helped you and hopefully helped your workflow. So that's it for this one, guys. Don't forget you can support what I do. Head to spvids.com where I sell drum packs for your projects. There's also Teespring as well, where I sell t-shirts. All the links to that are in the description below. And you should also notice now that I have the thanks button finally under my videos. I don't know why it's taken so long for my channel to have this feature, but you can now directly donate when you watch one of my videos. Obviously, if you find it useful, that would be really appreciated. And at the moment, every single penny helps me to keep doing what I'm doing here. Keep making beats, guys, and I'll be back with more content very soon. Peace.